Rob, Zach, and Tony, thank you for joining me. We are here to discuss the 2018 Emmy Awards one last time, and then we will never speak of them ever again. Now, I said before the ceremony that the most sensible thing to do would be just to, not really follow any of our picks, but to predict a combination of repeats and also just frontrunners, because the awards, they inevitably turn out to be so boring, and inevitably the odds do better than any individual. So that turned out not to be the case at all. Atlanta and The Handmaid's Tale were the favorites in our odds, and they were both shut out. Now, before we get to those, let's talk about another heavy hitter that was also shut out, and that was Jesus Christ Superstar. So who has a comment about that one?
Well, I will say that I am maybe one of the only people at Gold Derby who didn't predict that it was going to win for Best Director. Tony, you did as well. We owe ourselves a slap, and Riley as well. So maybe nobody on this.
Okay, so I switched it that morning. I just want to put it out there that I switched it that morning due to peer pressure. So I'm kind of with you as well. Okay.
It was not the front runner, but it was definitely on the rise.
It was. I mean, it was a real. I don't think there was a front runner in that category, to be honest with you. So I mean, it kind of made it. It was the apple in a basket of oranges, and Jesus Christ Superstar did win 5 Creative Arts Emmys. So it looked like it was going to pull off a miracle and win a bunch of others at the primetime show. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It did go home empty-handed. Although for a while there was a moment where I thought that John Legend might just win Best Actor when Versace kept losing prizes. It looked like Darren Chris's chances might have evaporated. So, but yeah, I don't know. I guess people appreciate it on a technical level, but they're still not ready to reward those live musical events with acting prizes or directing, at least in terms of like putting it in the movie mini categories.
Well, and I think the thing that always presented, I never bought the Brandon Victor Dixon thing because it would go against so much of any Emmy history in terms of performance categories involving these type of live shows. The only example from recent history, you have to go back to, I think, 94 or 93, when Robert Morse won lead actor in a movie mini for True, which was basically just a filmed stage play in front of an audience of his Truman Capote one-man show. And so I never bought that. I certainly never thought John Legend was going to win. I thought if Chris lost, it would be to like Benedict Cumberbatch. But I never bought the Brandon Victor Dixon thing. I still lost. I still did not predict the right one in directing. I thought Godless was going to take it. But yeah, who knows?
And also, like, I was when Ryan Murphy won that, I thought, oh well, I had Twin Peaks anyway, and then I changed it that morning, so I would have been wrong. Like, he was probably coming 4th or 5th in that race. I can't believe he won that. Yeah, that was very surprising. I don't know where that came from, but there you go.
Especially when you see how poorly Versace did overall, losing supporting actress, losing supporting actor, losing writing. There was a moment there where I thought, wow, is it going to get completely shut out after those Creative Arts Emmys wins? But then it rallied with those 3 big victories. So I don't know. I guess maybe you had 7 contenders in that category, so you only needed a small percentage of the vote anyway. And I'm guessing that's what helped Ryan Murphy win his first directing prize since the pilot for Glee almost 10 years ago.
Right.
I think one thing is that it's, we base our predictions off of what's happened before. And I think maybe we didn't properly account for vote splitting, at least in the limited directing category. Like, I suspect now that he would have taken it for the first season of American Crime Story had, vote splitting not been a thing. This year, he wasn't up against anyone from his own show.
Right.
Yeah. So Switching over to comedy, Tony, you kind of mentioned how you didn't predict, Jesus Christ Superstar because it didn't look like things from the past. I've been kind of surprised all season how Atlanta has been the front runner in the Gold Derby odds, just because Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, to put it delicately, as others do, is more Academy friendly, and also won the Golden Globe, it won Critics' Choice, it won PGA. Like, I'm fine if anybody wants to predict Atlanta individually, but I was surprised that it was so widespread in our predictions, and I was the only one in our group who had Maisel in directing. So how do we feel about how Atlanta was shut out at the main telecast?
I thought it was a real shame, for no other reason than, at the very least, Teddy Perkins, deserved, I thought, directing. But that could have been another issue, another aspect of vote splitting, because you had two Atlanta nominees. Whereas I think that if Teddy Perkins was the only directing nominee, I think maybe it would have had a better shot. But it seems like Maisel was just unstoppable for it to win that many. I mean, I can't even remember the last time a comedy series, wins 8.
Yeah,
so
insane.
It's a real shame too, because all due respect to Mrs. Maisel, but Atlanta is perhaps the best show on television right now. I mean, it's incredibly ambitious and daring in what it's trying to do. And you're right, Riley. Maisel is more Academy friendly. I was going back and forth on those two because of the creative arts wins. I ultimately settled on Atlanta because I felt like it had a harder hill to climb in terms of winning creative arts Emmys. And so the fact that it won, like for Cat Williams, I thought was a harbinger of popularity overall. But I think that, the fact that the show does, some episodes of the show aren't even comedic in the least bit. I mean, they're
most episodes of the show aren't comedic.
yeah. So
I think that's the issue.
Yeah. But I do think it's a real shame for that show to have not won a single award on the primetime telecast, not least of all because, it's a show that is made by people of color largely, and for an Emmy telecast that started the evening off singing about diversity, there was a long time where it was a lot of white people winning awards, up until I think Regina King was the first person of color to win anything. So I think that for it to go home empty-handed that night is really a shame.
Do we know where Cat Williams was? Did I miss him?
No, he wasn't there.
Yeah,
Wasn't at the at Creative Arts, and wasn't at the primetime ceremony, which I thought was a shame, because I would have loved to have seen Cat Williams and Tiffany Haddish butcher somebody else's name, because they would have. I'm still not over that. I'm still not over it.
I know you'll be talking about that for months. The problem with Atlanta is that it is not funny really compared to a lot of the other shows, and I love it. I'm just making that point that the Academy will just probably don't really like the show, and I'm amazed that it won so many awards that it already has. Like last year, it won a few on the primetime telecast. That was probably a miracle. This season, it had Maisel, which just railroaded everybody, because that was like Mad Men, but with a bit of laughs, and Amy Sherman Palladino's 80-page scripts. And Atlanta is very unusual. Even if it was about white people, I still think it would struggle. It's kind of like an auteur show like Louis, and and I just don't think it's in their wheelhouse at all. I can't even believe it was nominated at this rate. Robin's season was so much better than the first season, in my opinion. And the fact that it was completely shut out doesn't surprise me in retrospect. And I'm really glad that I made that switch a day or two before the Emmys, because I was on the Atlanta train for months and then realized the Academy don't like this show. They really don't.
And I think that last year, looking at it in hindsight, last year, I think both of the Atlanta wins, particularly for Donald Glover, were more about Glover than they were necessarily about the show. it also helped that BAN, the show that Glover won directing for last year, was almost entirely hysterically funny. It was a true comedic highlight of the season, whereas Atlanta this year, I think, really departed from any comedic roots, and that's why I never had Atlanta. I was like, it's too. I mean, next to Atlanta, Maisel is a laugh riot,
Right.
And I think that the hour-long thing, you know, people were. I think some people. I think I heard Paul and Tom talking about the fact that, you know, Maisel being an hour-long show was going to be a hindrance, and I kind of put that aside because I just went back to comedy. Which of these two frontrunners is the funniest? And that's clearly Maisel.
Well, our three frontrunners, actually, if you include Barry, like all of them were dramedies, which is why I think, you know, you kind of had to have a dramedy win ultimately.
That's right.
Well, I think that, you know, Maisel is much more, it's a dramedy, but it's also a screwball dramedy if you were going to categorize it as anything. I mean, it's a show about a stand-up comedian. So by its very nature, it should be funny, right? Atlanta, I think, ultimately is the kind of show that will get nominated for Best Comedy Series, like Louis or Master of None. You know, I think actors like to think that, you know, they could be like Donald Glover and create a show that good and star in it and write it and direct it. But when it comes to the Academy overall, it's not everybody's cup of tea. If there's one thing that I learned from this year, going off of last year as well, and I'm sure we'll talk about The Handmaid's Tale later on, but, you know, first season Handmaid's Tale swept the Emmys. First season Mrs. Maisel swept the Emmys. If there's a hot new show on, you might as well predict it to sweep, I guess. That's what happened here.
It's become the Golden Globes, because the Emmys used to be all about like constantly repeating things. Like Doris Roberts won thousands of Emmys in a row, and now it's like the Golden Globes, which love their shiny new toys. The Emmys are becoming that way because, again, it is now a plurality popularity contest, and they love their shiny new toys, and that's exactly what Maisel was. On the drama side, that's exactly what Handmaids wasn't. They were kind of done maybe with that show. And we're going to talk about that now, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know if I'd quite say
I also want to, if I can, just really quick, I want to make it very clear, for me at least. I loved it. I love Atlanta. I've always loved Atlanta. Maisel, I wanted Maisel to win because Maisel made me so happy. Like, in a way that, as daring as Atlanta was, Maisel just made me just happy. And so I want to be careful that we don't say, oh, it's a shame that, you know, it's almost like it's taking away from Maisel's win. And I think Maisel was completely deserving of everything that it got.
Oh, no. I don't want to sound like I don't think Maisel is not as an undeserving winner. I mean, it's certainly a wonderful show and, you know, very well made, and all the actors on it are great. I just think it's a shame that, you know, a show like Atlanta can be as ambitious and daring and always trying, you know, that makes me, in the way that Maisel made you happy, Atlanta makes me happy in a different kind of way, because I watch it every single week wondering what they're going to do next, you know. And
sorry.
No, that was basically it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, like I'll say that, you know, these are awards and there has to be winners and losers. So I'll say that Atlanta should have won and Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, by the same token, should have lost.
You and me, Riley.
Now, I think one surprise for all of us, actually, we all had Bill Hader in second, but at least for me, it was a very distant second. I thought that they weren't really going to be looking at the performances, in which case, you know, Bill Hader absolutely deserved it. And it'd be more about how Donald Glover would get the award, kind of like last year, not necessarily for, you know, an iconic acting achievement as earned, but just for his overall contribution to television. So that, I feel like, bodes very well going forward for the Emmys, as does, you know, the loss for The Handmaid's Tale, because it's not just about, you know, what did the Emmys like in the past and will they continue to award it. I feel like The Handmaid's Tale, it won all those awards last year because it was the show, and this year it wasn't the show. so it doesn't just keep winning. The
That's
Emmys move
right.
on to whatever is more relevant now.
It's pretty
And
exciting.
also, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's pretty exciting from the standpoint that, I think that, I guess, excepting John Oliver and technically Peter Dinklage, there were no repeat winners, and so it is kind of exciting to be able to predict the Emmys in a way where it's like, all right,
Game of Thrones.
technically speaking, Game of Thrones, but you know what I mean.
SNL, yeah.
The year before,
Yeah, but
SNL.
I
I'm
think
still processing that.
yeah, I think the Emmys, we criticize it now for being a popularity contest, but there were a lot of examples last night where we could probably argue that they're actually paying attention and they're actually watching this stuff and awarding really, really great performances and very strong seasons. I saw an article yesterday that said Game of Thrones won yet again for one of its worst seasons. That's nonsense. It was a very popular, very well received, truncated season that aired a long time ago. And in retrospect, I can see why it won, because it has a huge following, and it is so well made, and it's so expensive and so impressive and cinematic. Of course, it had a great shot. Riley and I were talking the other day when we had a Slugfest, and we were kind of dismissing it, thinking, well, it's probably not going to be Game of Thrones' turn this year, because we were still thinking The Handmaid's had a lot of heat, and it does, it absolutely does. But the drama side was so spread out amongst a whole bunch of very deserving winners. The only show that didn't really claim a trophy was probably Killing Eve. It would have been great to see that win something. But it really was, I thought it was so refreshing to see the Americans and The Crown and Game of Thrones win very important awards on the drama side. It was exciting, and I feel bad for The Handmaid's Tale because I didn't think it was such a bad season. I thought it was really impressive. But obviously, and it still won 3, because I was talking to a colleague this morning, and she said, "Oh, Handmaid's Tale won nothing. That's a joke." I'm like, "Well, no, it won 3. It won Guest Actress. It won Cinematography. I think. Am I wrong?"
No, cinematography was down, but yeah.
Right, and I'm more excited, and I know Tony will agree. I don't know about the other two guys, but The Crown had such an incredible second season. They paid attention. It got 5 Emmys, including Best Actress and Best Directing. That's insanely cool. So, they're paying attention. That's my point. I'm rambling. I'm tired, but they're paying attention.
Yeah.
I was surprised that Game of Thrones, I get that it's big and admired, but I feel like this year I kind of expected it to be kind of everybody's number 2, number 3 vote, which actually would have meant that it would have gotten 0 votes under this plurality system. But yeah, a year after it airs, kind of a year before it's going to air next, it's still winning the top prize. Even this year, without winning writing, without winning directing, editing, cinematography, casting, it still pulls off the win.
It almost felt like an anticlimax there at the end, because the 2 years that it won before, it swept, right? It won for writing and directing. Peter Dinklage won in 2015 along with it. So, there was a sense of okay, they're going to reward Game of Thrones, right? And so it was kind of odd at the end there for it to win after you saw these 2 major wins for The Crown and my favorite too, The Americans. There was a moment there where I was like, is it going to be one of those 2 shows that's going to win? Because, it's not going to be The Handmaid's Tale anymore. But I guess part of what made me not predict Game of Thrones ultimately was I figured that, they were going to save all their love for it for next year, knowing that they're going to have this opportunity to give it a huge send-off, especially with, I think, 5 of the drama series contenders not coming back next year, I think, is the number I've heard.
Something like that. There's going to be a lot of turnover.
A lot of empty slots, yeah. So
what's
not? Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask.
Okay, well,
Things and Westworld.
Yeah, and then I've heard The Handmaid's Tale is going to be late.
It's kind of iffy because they start shooting next month, so they could come back if they wanted to, but I don't know why they scheduled it the way they did this past year. So
and then
And Americans is obviously not coming.
Americans is not coming back, and The Crown too has not gotten a release date yet. It's scheduled for 2019, but
I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be early because they're already deep into filming it.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I didn't see a confirmed route. Anyway, I'm speculating here.
There'll be some turnover. That's the point.
And along those lines, I'm wondering about what we're going to be talking about for the next few months, which is the guilds, because last year at the Emmys, The Handmaid's Tale, it took series, it took directing, among a bunch of other ones. It went on to win PJ, went on to win DJ, but now it's lost those same awards at these Emmys to Game of Thrones and The Crown, which are going to be ineligible. So is it going to kind of pick up a bunch of awards in a couple months, kind of just by default? Or maybe HBO will rally and get Westworld some surprise wins? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
I don't know, but I'll tell you, I was really... I know that reaction to this season of The Handmaid's Tale was mixed, to say the least. I was on the side of liking it. Yeah. And I think obviously there's still some passion for it if it got those 20 nominations. But yeah, I mean, I was totally shocked that it won nothing at all. So I don't know what that does for its guild presence. Perhaps
I wonder if it's like Feud. Feud is nominated across the board, but it couldn't really win anything anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very happy that the Handmaid's Tale didn't win anything. Because I couldn't handle the season. It was too much for me. But the only one I was disappointed in was Yvonne Strahovski.
Yes.
That was my only disappointment, because even though I had major problems with the season, she was so consistently good. She was just so consistently good. But I'm not going to behoove Thandie Newton that win. I was personally pulling for Vanessa Kirby, but I can't behoove Thandie Newton that win. She was incredible in a show I don't get.
Yeah,
she was very strong in that. I mean, yeah. If you were going to lose to anybody, then you might as well lose to Thandie Newton, who gave one of the best acceptance speeches of the night, other than, of course, the guy who is now going to get married in the best marriage proposal of all time.
Like, one of the greatest quotes I've ever heard at the Emmys is, "I don't believe in God, but I'm going to thank her anyway." I will be remembering that for a very, very long time. That was fantastic. Like, I said this in the Slugfest with Matt Noble beforehand, before the show, that if The Handmaids lose supporting actress in a drama, then vote splitting is a thing. And I think that was the main reason for why Thandie Newton was able to eke that win out, because then people will turn to, what about Samira Wiley? But again, she was up against Kelly Jenrette and Cherry Jones, who weren't really a factor, whereas we had Ann Dowd and Yvonne Strahovski, and to a lesser extent, Alexis Bledel, Emmy winner from last year, who were all quite strong and had very strong episodes. And so they cancelled each other out, absolutely, without a doubt in my mind, because Yvonne Strahovski or Ann Dowd, I think most of us were predicting. And Thandie Newton, good on her for actually pulling that off. I was very disappointed that Yvonne, my fellow Aussie, didn't win, but who doesn't love Thandie Newton? She is the best thing about Westworld.
And I also want to say that one of the patterns that I noticed was that even if this was under the old system, what I noticed about a lot of the winners is that in most cases, I could make a case that maybe some of them actually watch the episodes, because the episodes for a lot of those winners were stellar submissions. They weren't like lower tier, like, oh, I don't know, none of them were like Women of Kumar, like, how the hell did that win? Sorry, Alice, love you.
There's a deep cut there.
I will never forget. I'm still scarred by that, because I still think Jennifer Garner, she still doesn't have that bloody Emmy. Anyway, that's a whole other story.
I thought vote splitting was pretty rampant this year, actually.
Yeah, I think that could certainly, even though I predicted him to win, that could have definitely helped Matthew Rhys
I think it totally helped Matthew Reeves.
Yeah,
Both-
judging by
both-
the applause, by Ron Stevens Jones' win.
Yeah. Both vote splitting and tapes, honestly. I think, I would have given it to him on episodes as well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think the tapes are important. We have to remember that Tom is a voter, and he said that you've got to like click all these buttons. You almost got to give blood just to prove that you've watched the episodes these days. It's not simply a matter of just checking something off and saying, yeah, I watched them. You actually have to say you've watched them, and you have to sign an affidavit or a test legally that you've done it. And that's why someone like Claire Foy, if you watch Dear Mrs. Kennedy, how can you possibly argue that she wasn't deserving of that Emmy? Incredible performance.
I disagree wholeheartedly with the Emmy voters watching the episodes.
Really?
I think that they, have seen seasons which contain the episodes, so that might help them. But I think we would see a completely different set of winners under the panel system. Also because the panel system rewarded different kind of acting as well.
Really? Give me an example. Like, where do you think someone won this?
like lead actress, like Elizabeth Moss, that 10th episode where she is breaking down, with her daughter and she's getting raped and stuff. That would win in the panel system against Claire Foy's more subtle acting, even though Claire Foy is absolutely more deserving.
Okay.
That was definitely like more Emmy submission kind of thing. How can you win an Emmy? Let's see how many different emotions you can play in a single episode. I always get that feeling whenever I'm watching This Is Us. You know what I mean? Like, all right, here's your Emmy submission tape. Here's your Emmy submission tape. Here's your Emmy submission tape.
And I think,
know what? Actually,
in Matthew Reese's case, I think, vote splitting and having good tape, because I remember what Tom O'Brien said. Tom O'Brien is somebody that didn't watch The Americans and pretty much only watched that submission. Now, he was watching it because he votes in the writing branch, but even he was talking about how blown away he was by Matthew Reese. So yeah. I think that if you submit, and I know that people are going to talk about Dinklage, and I know there's Dinklage fatigue. I still submit that there is a popularity with Peter Dinklage. He was really great in that episode that he submitted, especially that showdown between him and Cersei. So yeah, he was. I don't know that if you can totally. I'm still not convinced that if you bomb your Emmy submission, that you can win.
What about Alec Baldwin last year? But even drama lead actor, I would say that Sterling K. Brown, again, not an opinion that I share. I think Matthew Reese was absolutely better. But as Zach said, This Is Us has episodes that are tailor-made to be Emmy submissions, not because they make for better performances, but they make for baitier performances.
I think that Sterling's was nowhere near what he had last year. I think if you're judging between the two This Is Us guys, I think Milo actually submitted a far stronger tape that was more baity.
To Riley's point, I think we should also remember that if the tapes really mattered like they used to, then vote splitting would be less of an issue, and we would have the Felicity Huffman rule, where we would have two people from the same show who would then basically have two submissions each, unless one of their co-stars was actively trying to ensure that they weren't in their episode, which does happen. But we would have a stronger contingent from Westworld because we had two guys from that show. And for example, I'm just pulling examples out of the air, but perhaps maybe because of the vote splitting, which really seemed to be a factor this year, that maybe the episodes weren't as important as we collectively think they were.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this also. I wonder if perhaps one thing that we haven't talked about is, maybe what these Emmy voters consider to be good performances is evolving just a bit, because taking comedy supporting actor, for instance, when Jim Parsons used to win that award over and over again, not to take away from what Jim Parsons does and an actor, I couldn't speak on The Big Bang Theory, but that was much more broadly comedic. kind of performance. And, you know, you've seen people like Jeffrey Tambor, Donald Glover, and even Bill Hader to a certain extent, giving much more subtler kind of performances and winning that category. So it might just be that, you know, what they deem to be the best performances in a given category has changed a bit. I mean, you know, Kate McKinnon has, you know, won that award twice, and now she loses to Alex Borstein, who's not as, I guess, presentational in a sense, or, you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, I guess, you know, I don't know how much we'll agree on that one, but another trend this year, which we've seen the last few years, as Amanda loves to remind us, is that you kind of need to be in a series winner to win. Now, we saw 8 dramas win this year. The exception was Counterpart in main title design. On the limited series side, the only one that won an award that wasn't up for the series award was 7 Seconds. And for comedies, we saw, you know, Will and Grace and Broad City. But generally, you need to be in a series nominee in order to win an award in any category, which seems to be a function of this new popularity system. So how do we feel about how it's pushing out, you know, fringe contenders for the most part?
Well, I think it certainly helps. You know, you brought up Killing Eve, and, you know, depending on how that second season is, I could see that being a Best Drama Series nominee next Emmy cycle, and perhaps that'll help Sandra Oh win, especially if the competition of Claire Foy and Elizabeth Moss is non-existent. But I guess there is a certain, it's like with the Oscars now, when they expanded from 5 to 10 nominees, and, you know, movies that were nominated for Best Picture were more likely to win things, so that everybody got a little something. And, you know, for the most part, shows that were nominated for series did walk away with at least one prize, with, you know, few exceptions, and in total of, you know, including creative arts as well. Obviously, there were exceptions like Blackish and Kimmy Schmidt, and I think Silicon Valley as well. But, you know, for the most part, it did seem to be like, let's give every show something.
I think, like, you know how invariably at the Golden Globes, if you have a performer without a show nominated, it won't win. That's the Chris Beecham rule, so I like to call it. I think he's the one that alerted me to that. Was going to give him credit for it, but I think now that's happening here as well, and you're not going to get winners like back in the old days when you had Amanda Plummer from The Outer Limits win Guest Actress, and you used to find a lot of very interesting guest winners where the show wasn't nominated at all. And that was the argument that we were trotting out for Cameron Britton, who did not win, lost to Ron Cephas-Jones, really heartbreakingly, because I just think there wasn't a better performance in that category than Cameron Britton. And the fact that Mindhunter was completely shut out is so ridiculous. But that being said, like, I just think, well, that is a very interesting and important factor that we do need to keep in mind now because of the way that the voting works. And I just think it's really important to remember that, because like Regina King, that was just an outlier because they just love her. That being said, though, as an aside, before you guys comment on what I just said, I just think, I hope that makes people watch 7 Seconds, because it was really unfairly dumped by Netflix. I watched it because I thought, and I was thinking, oh, this is going to be such work having to watch this. Looks really awful. And by like the 3rd episode, I was so hooked and so mesmerized by Regina King's performance. I know that we all think she won because she's popular, but maybe some of them actually maybe watched it on Netflix and realized, wow, she's incredibly strong as this grieving mother in this show. I don't know if you guys saw it, but if you haven't, you should watch it.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I mean, number one, I love how surprised Regina King always looks whenever she wins awards.
Yeah.
Even though she's like, I guess she's going to become like the next Allison Janney or Julia Louis-Dreyfus and just keep racking them up now, which good for her, by the way. Yeah. I think, you know, you bring up Netflix, and one of the big takeaways from last night, even though they did not win a series award, they have got 23 Emmys. Tying HBO for the most of between creative arts and prime time. They won 7 prizes during the prime time telecast, which I think is more than any other network. Certainly was more than HBO. They won for acting, they won for writing, they won for directing. Even though they don't have a series prize, I think that the big takeaway is that Netflix has kind of changed the game forever. I know that Amazon and Hulu beat them to the series wins, but I think that Netflix is going to remain the premier streaming service just because they have things like 7 Seconds or Godless or The Crown or Stranger Things or so on and so forth. They have a Black Mirror. They have a volume of content, and they're attracting people to their network. And they're about to enter the Oscar race in a big way this year too with Roma.
It's crazy to me, like along similar lines, about HBO, how we kind of thought this was kind of a down year for HBO, and then they just surprise us with the Bill Hader win, with the Tandy Newton win. They hold on to series. I mean, next year, watch out for HBO again when they have Veep back, when they've got Big Little Lies back, when I'm sure Barry will expand instead of winning its only 2 acting nominations. I assume it'll get a couple more. And Game of Thrones, I think next year is going to sweep like we have literally never seen before at the Emmys, because if it can win this year without winning much else, and I mean the last couple times that it won, it did pull off the biggest sweeps in history with 12 awards, and since then it's made some headway in some categories that it struggled with in the past, like in score, where under the new voting system, the issue for these popular shows is just getting the nomination. And then once they're in there off the panels, then they can just cruise to a victory. So if Game of Thrones gets nominated for that again, it looks like Peter Dinklage is pretty secure, and he'll get his 4th to make him the only person ever to win 4 Best Drama Supporting Actor trophies. And finally, also cinematography is a category that they have never won before, and they're not even nominated these days. Boardwalk Empire used to always beat them. It won 3 times. So what does Game of Thrones do? For their series finale, they have the Boardwalk Empire cinematographer shooting it. So I think that's another one. That guy has won the American Society of Cinematographers Award the last 5 times that he has been nominated.
Wow.
Amazing.
I guess
But could I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I think Game of Thrones really could completely sweep. I also think that maybe there could be some. I don't think it'll be as easy as that. We haven't seen what Big Little Lies would do in a drama category, in a regular drama series category. I mean, if Meryl Streep is even halfway good in Big Little Lies and has enough, we don't know what her episode count is going to be like, but whether she's guest actress or whether she's supporting, it's just going to be check off Meryl Streep's name. So
yes.
Could there be some, and we don't know what this 3rd season of The Crown is going to be, but it's certainly going to have more momentum coming off of these Emmy wins. There's a lot of anticipation with the new cast of Olivia Colman and Helena Bonham Carter. Could there be some obstacles that could make a Game of Thrones sweep more challenging?
Quality on Game of Thrones part 2. I mean, we know that it could totally let us down in the last season. Who knows? I hope not, because I've invested years of my life watching this show, as we all do with any television show. We want it to stick the landing. We have to see.
See, I would say that Game of Thrones has actually never deserved to win Best Drama Series. So whether it sticks to landing for me or not, I'm not really factoring that into whether it'll sweep the Emmys.
Wow. Cool.
All right, so what are our final thoughts before we close the book on the 70th Emmy Awards? Tony?
Clairefoy, and I'm going to, in the future, stick with my gut. Of course, next time it'll probably lead me astray.
Yeah, Clairefoy, I feel like, if I was going to cry during the ceremony, that would have been it. Maybe if I hadn't been watching with other people.
I would say 2 things. Picking repeat winners. This could all change next year. we know, but maybe picking repeat winners isn't the way to go anymore with the way Emmy voting has changed in the last couple of years. And also, just one thing about the telecast. I hope that the Motion Picture Academy watched that moment with Glenn Weiss and said to themselves, maybe moving categories off air is a bad idea. And perhaps we can present 24 categories with a bunch of filler in 3 hours and cut to the news and not completely ruin what it is that makes the show special, because that's the kind of moment that we watch live TV for.
Absolutely. And following what you just said, Zach, I think I thank the Academy for these surprises. I think we should remember this next year before the telecast, that the Emmys love throwing surprises at us. Sometimes they go with the flow, but generally speaking, they love throwing surprises at us. And we at Gold Derby think we know everything and we've got it all like worked out. And then there are like 3 or 4 or 5 shockers like there were last night. And that just is life for me. That is everything. I'm so happy.
I think it was more shockers than that.